I was pulling on my jacket when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't look at it. I was already running 5 minutes late, and my son had texted me twice that week reminding me that dinner started at 6:30, not 7. He'd inherited that from his mother, the punctuality, the slight edge in his voice when plans shifted. I used to love that about her. On him, it sometimes landed differently. But I looked anyway. Force of habit after 40 years in commercial real estate. You always check the phone. It was a text from my accountant, Glenn Foss. We'd worked together since 2003, back when I was still building the portfolio from scratch, buying distressed properties in outer Charlotte, and betting on neighborhoods nobody else believed in yet. Glenn wasn't the type to text after 5 o'clock. He wasn't the type to text at all, honestly. He was a phone call man, a printed report man, a let's sit down and go through the numbers man. The text said, "Call me before you go anywhere tonight. It's important." I stood there in my kitchen with my jacket half on and read it 3 times. Glenn had never sent me a message like that. Not when the market crashed in '08 and 2 of my properties went underwater. Not when my wife passed and I missed a quarterly review entirely. Not once in over 20 years had he used the word important in a message to me. I called him. He picked up before the second ring. "Leonard," he said, and I knew right away. You can tell in the first word sometimes, the way a person says your name when something is wrong. Not panicked, not angry, just careful, like they're about to carry something heavy and they want to make sure they have a good grip first. "What happened?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock if you can." "Glenn, tell me now." Another pause. I heard him breathe out slowly through his nose. "It's about the Whitmore account," he said. "And the Harlan Street property. I've been going through the documents you signed over the transfer of the management rights and—" He stopped. "Leonard, some of these signatures don't match." I sat down on the kitchen stool. I didn't decide to sit. My legs just did it. "What do you mean they don't match?" "I mean they don't look like you signed them," he said quietly. "I've been comparing them against 10 years of documents. The pressure, the slant, the way you loop the L. It's close, but it's not right, and the dates are off on 2 of the transfer authorizations. I had my assistant pull the originals this afternoon, and—" He paused again. "Leonard, someone has been moving access rights on 3 of your properties. Someone who had access to your personal files." I thought about who had access to my personal files. My daughter had worked alongside me for 6 years. I want to be honest about something before I go any further. I was not an easy father to grow up with. I'm not saying that to excuse what happened. Nothing excuses what happened. But I think you deserve the full picture, not just the version where I'm the victim and she's the villain, because the truth was always more complicated than that. My daughter's name is Audrey. She's 34 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness and a capacity for patience that, when it finally runs out, does not run out quietly. When she was 9, I missed her spring recital because I was closing a deal on a warehouse property in Greensboro. When she was 16, I forgot to pick her up from soccer practice twice in the same month. When she graduated from NC State, I sat in the bleachers in the rain and felt proud in the way that fathers do when they're watching someone who turned out well despite them. She came to work for me at 28. It was her idea, not mine. She had a business degree, a few years in property management at another firm, and she said she wanted to learn the portfolio from the ground up. I was honest with her. I said, "You'll have to earn it. I won't go easier on you because you're my daughter. I'll probably go harder." She'd laughed at that. "Dad," she said, "I've been training for hard my whole life." I should have heard the edge in that. I thought she was being funny. For 2 years, she was excellent. She renegotiated 2 commercial leases that saved us close to $40,000 annually. She identified a zoning issue on a property I'd owned for 8 years that nobody had caught, and she handled the variance process herself without asking for help. My property manager, A steady man named Conrad, who had worked for me for 12 years, told me she had better instincts than most people he'd seen come through the business. I started including her in more decisions. I introduced her to my banker, to Glenn, to the attorney who handled our entity structuring. I began CCing her on documents. I gave her signing authority on routine operational accounts. I trusted her completely. That was the door I opened. She walked all the way through it. I didn't go to dinner that night. I called my son and told him something had come up with the business. He asked if everything was okay. I said it would be. I don't know why I said that. I didn't know yet if it would be. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, sat down at my desk, and started pulling up files. By midnight, I had found 4 wire transfers I didn't remember authorizing. Each one was under $25,000, the federal reporting threshold. 1 in March, 2 in August, 1 in October. All routed to an LLC I didn't recognize, a company called Preston Advisors LLC, registered in Delaware. I searched the name. Nothing came up. No website, no filings beyond the registration, no physical address. I went to bed at 2 in the morning and didn't sleep. Glenn's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and when I walked in at 8 o'clock the next morning, he was already standing at his whiteboard with 3 columns of handwritten notes. He'd clearly been there for a while. He walked me through everything methodically, the way Glenn always did things. 4 fraudulent transfer authorizations totaling just under $96,000. 2 property management rights documents with signatures that forensic examination would likely determine were forged. An amendment to a limited liability agreement that, if allowed to stand, would give a third party, the unnamed partner of Preston Advisors LLC, co-management authority over my 2 most valuable commercial holdings. A mixed-use building on Trade Street, and a self-storage complex in Concord that had been cash-flowing steadily for 11 years. If that amendment went through, I would effectively lose operational control of nearly half my portfolio's value. Who set up Preston Advisors? I asked. Glenn looked at me steadily. I don't know yet, but the email address used in the Delaware filing is a variation of your daughter's personal email. 1 letter different. I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline for a long time. I need you to tell me you could be wrong, I said. Leonard, he said carefully, I don't think I'm wrong. I did not call Audrey. I know that's probably the first thing you'd want to do. Confront her, hear her voice, listen for the hesitation. But I'd spent enough years in negotiations to know that the worst thing you can do when you suspect someone is tip them off before you have everything you need. Emotion is a liability when someone has already been thinking 10 moves ahead of you. Instead, I called my attorney, a man named Preston Hale, which gave me a dark, humorless moment when I thought about the name Preston Advisors. I told Preston everything I knew. He referred me to a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud cases. He also told me, very gently, that I should not discuss this with any family members until we knew the full scope. What if she's already moved on something else? I asked. Then we find that too, he said. But we find it with documentation, not with a phone call that warns her we're looking. So I waited. I kept showing up to work. I had coffee with Audrey on a Thursday morning the way we'd done most Thursdays for 3 years, and I sat across the table from my daughter and talked about a property dispute in Kannapolis and a tenant situation in one of our retail units, and I watched her face and looked for something, guilt, nervousness, a flicker of something off, and I couldn't find it. She was calm. She was engaged. She asked smart questions. I drove home that Thursday evening and sat in my driveway for 15 minutes without getting out of the car. The forensic accountant, a thorough woman named Carol Bassett, who came recommended by 3 attorneys in Preston's network, spent 11 days going through 6 years of records. What she found was more organized than I'd expected, and that was somehow worse. This hadn't been impulsive. Audrey had been careful. She had moved slowly, spacing transactions months apart, staying below reporting thresholds, using entities that were difficult to trace back to her. The LLC had a registered agent in Delaware with no other connection to our family. The email address variation was the only forensic thread that connected it to her directly, along with a pattern of document access that showed someone with her login credentials had opened specific files in the weeks before each fraudulent transfer. Total value of the attempted fraud, including the management rights transfer that hadn't yet been finalized, $412,000. Carol laid the report on the conference table in Preston's office, and for a while none of us spoke. "Why didn't she just ask me?" I said. It was the wrong question for the room. I knew that, but it was the only one I could get out. Preston answered anyway. "Sometimes the question they're really asking," he said, "is one you don't know they were waiting to be asked. We brought it to a meeting, not a confrontation in the way you might imagine. Not at the dinner table, not with voices raised. Preston advised a formal setting with documentation present, and he was right. We met on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at his office, and Audrey arrived thinking it was a routine quarterly review. She knew within 30 seconds that it wasn't. I watched her look at the folders on the table, then at Preston, then at me. The composure she was wearing held for about 3 seconds. Then something shifted behind her eyes, and she looked like the 9-year-old girl who'd walked into the kitchen after I'd missed the recital. Not angry yet, just caught between two versions of herself. She didn't deny it. That surprised me more than anything else. I had expected the version where she argued the documents were misinterpreted, where she had an explanation for Preston advisors, where she went cold in legal and let her defenses come up. Instead, she sat down, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "How much do you know?" "All of it," I said. She nodded slowly. She looked at the table. "I've been angry at you for a long time, Dad." "I know," I said. "I'm not saying that's a reason. I know that too." The room was very quiet. She told me what she'd been planning to do with the money. Some of it she'd already moved. $87,000 into a separate account she'd opened in her own name the previous year. Her intention, she said, had been to use the management rights transfer as leverage. If I refused to formalize her ownership stake in the portfolio, she would have had co-management authority regardless. She would have forced my hand. "You were going to hold my own properties hostage," I said. "I was going to make you negotiate with me," she said, "like a business partner, because you never treated me like one." That landed the way she probably knew it would. I didn't answer right away. Preston intervened and explained, in the measured and precise way that attorneys do, what the legal exposure looked like, what forgery carried, what wire fraud carried, particularly across state lines given the Delaware registration, what the next steps would be if this proceeded through formal channels. Audrey's hands were flat on the conference table. She was very still. "What do you want to do, Leonard?" Preston asked me. I looked at my daughter, the woman who had renegotiated those leases, who had caught the zoning issue nobody else found, who had shown up every Thursday morning for 3 years and asked smart questions and worked harder than most people I'd hired, who had been 9 years old in an empty auditorium waiting for a father who was closing a deal in Greensboro. "I want the $87,000 returned to the business accounts," I said, "fully, within 60 days. I want the Preston Advisors LLC dissolved and the management rights amendment voided. I want a signed legal agreement that the attempted transfer never occurred." I paused. "And I want an outside firm conducting quarterly audits of every account for the next 5 years. Audrey was looking at me. "And then?" she said. "And then," I said, "we figure out what this business actually looks like going forward. With a real conversation. With a real agreement. With an attorney in the room, not behind one of us." She exhaled. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something older and more complicated. "I should have just talked to you," she said. Yeah, I said. You should have been easier to talk to. I didn't argue that. I couldn't. People ask me. Well, they don't ask me personally, but I've seen the question come up in conversations around situations like this, whether I was too easy on her, whether a father who lets his daughter off the hook for nearly $500,000 in fraud has actually taught her anything at all. I've thought about that a lot. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is this. The $87,000 came back within 45 days. The LLC was dissolved. The amendment was voided. Preston drew up a formal partnership agreement, a real one this time, with clear equity stakes, defined decision-making authority, and a dispute resolution process that didn't involve forged signatures or Delaware shell companies. I also changed my will. Not to cut her out. That was never the point, but to restructure things so that no single decision about the portfolio could be made unilaterally by anyone, including me. Conrad, my property manager, was given a seat in major operational decisions. An independent trustee was named for any estate transfers. Audrey knew about all of it. I showed her the documents myself. She didn't object. I think she understood that trust, once fractured the way ours was, doesn't come back the same shape it left. It comes back in whatever shape both people are willing to hold. We still have coffee on Thursdays. It's not the same as it was before. It's quieter, more careful, with a kind of formality underneath it that wasn't there 3 years ago. But she still asks smart questions, and I still answer them. My son doesn't know the details. He knows there was a business dispute that got resolved. I'll probably tell him the full story someday, when I'm sure he can hear it without it changing how he sees his sister. He loves her. She loves him. That's not something I was willing to put in a conference room. I'm 63 years old. I've built a real estate portfolio over 4 decades by learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, which risks are worth taking. I've gotten it wrong enough times to know that certainty is usually the first sign you're about to learn something. What I know for certain is that when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter that evening and I almost didn't look at it, I almost lost $400,000 and my daughter in the same season. I got both of them back, in different shapes than they left, but back. I check my phone now, every time it buzzes. And I have coffee on Thursdays and I ask how things are going and I listen. Really listen. The way I should have been doing since she was 9 years old and the auditorium was empty and I was 3 hours away thinking I was building something worth leaving her. She reminded me once, near the end of one of those Thursday coffees, that the business was only ever supposed to be the means. I think about that most mornings when I pull out of the driveway and head downtown. She wasn't wrong.